Hi, welcome to our panel discussion on the benefits of hosting an online event. During the discussion, please feel free to comment with any questions that you might have on the right side of your screen using the chat portal that you are on right now. And of course, we'll be having a live Q&A discussion with our panelists in the studio right after this. So I'd like to start off with introducing everyone who's with me here today. Beside me, we have Annie Tay. Annie is the content marketing specialist over at Pigeonhole Live, which is Singapore's premier audience interaction tech partner.
Yes.
And beside her, we have Wendy Ho. Wendy Ho, of course, from Artiste E, the leading artist management agency specializing in representing event hosts in Singapore. And all the way at the end, we have Mr. Gerry Koh. Gerry is a senior lecturer over at the Singapore Institute of Technology, and he's here as an expert on the education industry, especially the hospitality sector, talking about how this has changed the lives of his students and what they're learning in this time period. So I just want to start off by mentioning that we are at SIT at Republic Polytechnic. So thank you so much, Gerry, for allowing us to be here.
You're welcome.
Gerry, could we start off with finding out how the industry has changed for yourself and your students in this time period?
I think when we're looking at the educational industry, to a large extent, it has remained very, very stable. The thing that has changed with the current pandemic is actually the method of teaching and the method of learning on the part of the students. But if you look at the concept of hybrid and blended learning, educational workshops and so forth, they've actually been proceeding for quite a long time already. And then when you deal with online courses such as Coursera, even your Ivy League universities have been doing that for quite a long time. So we've had to adjust quite a bit during the first part when we had the circuit breaker. Students were actually confined to learning from home, but we've since opened up, and then with your safety measures built in, we have classes of less than 50 students. Some of my project groups now have been confined to only 5 packs, so it's a bit challenging actually.
Right. And Annie, you're from Pigeonhole Live, and you work a lot with providing solutions for audience interactions, technology and stuff like that. So how is the industry like right now, considering that you're working with this sector specifically?
Well, it's definitely changed quite a bit. We actually have had virtual and hybrid events before that we used to support, but the demand right now has definitely gone up way much. A lot of the conferences that we used to support are being cancelled, sadly, but we are seeing a lot of event planners who are stepping up to innovate. They're looking at all the different tech options that are available to them, and they're really trying to find new ways to engage the audiences, which is quite heartening.
Right. Wendy, you work directly with events MCs who are, on the other end of things. They are coming in and they have to host these events that are so different. How has it changed for you in the past few months?
A lot of our MCs have a piece-to-camera experience, so they're very used to doing broadcasts, so they're very, very comfortable in front of a camera. It's a different skill altogether when you're on stage and doing a live event. There's floor craft, you have to engage an audience, but this time around you're just looking straight into a camera and you're speaking. So most of our MCs were very, very familiar with it. So it's not that much of a transition. It's just that I think with events right now, a lot of clients are not quite sure what they want and how they want their show to look. Because right now we are going back to TV style. We're projecting to one person. So just imagine your laptop, 13-inch, 15-inch or whatever, that's just particularly to one person. So you have to broadcast for that method rather than broadcasting to 3,000 in front of you or even 200 in front of you.
And that's very interesting because I assume that it would shift the way that you teach your students, Gerry, about how the hospitality industry works now. If you're presenting to a certain crowd, if you're working in this business, it's very different. So has it affected the way or what you teach your students?
In terms of content, actually not. But the ability to do field trips and internships obviously has been adversely affected. But within the classroom itself, I think the thing that I sorely miss as a lecturer is the lively interaction and the ability to look at body language cues and check whether students really understand or otherwise. So I think the method of teaching is forced upon us, and everybody is hoping to go back to sort of the old way of doing things. But now, as I mentioned, with your safety measures and 1 meter apart, it becomes very, very challenging. The time taken to cover a content for a lesson is much lengthier. So you got to build in all your extra timing because you got to see whether 50 people or 40 people on a Zoom format is actually following the lesson or not. Yeah. So there's a lot of hits and misses here and there for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I really actually agree. Because I've been doing some lessons and all that via Zoom, right? It's really difficult to interject when a teacher or a lecturer is talking or whatever. Because like in class they can see you and they can motion to you very quickly. Now you have to raise hand, wait for the teacher to say, okay, please Wendy, ask your question kind of thing. Right. So I think that interaction I really feel is missing. And like you said, it takes a longer time to cover whatever you need to cover, because I find that, when I actually go for a course or a 3-day course, it takes like within the 4 hours, we can cover quite a lot of things. When someone asks a question, we can also get visual cues, from the lecturer and the rest of the participants. But for a Zoom call, it's just really, really difficult.
No, and that's interesting because it's a full-on like a virtual setting, right? Where it doesn't feel very much like natural human interaction anymore. So I wanted to ask you, Annie, in terms of providing solutions, audience interaction and engagement, is there anything that can be done or that Pigeonhole Live does do to help out with this?
Yeah, definitely. I think for one thing, I think it's a lot of reimagining what interaction could be like. So definitely a lot of the human interaction that is missed, it cannot be replicated directly, but there is a lot of kind of like new ways that you can do it. So for example, having more engagement activities, like I did a course recently where they just kept doing polls in the middle just to check up on the students to say like, okay, so are we on the same track? Are we doing the same thing? There's also like having just structured Q&As where people can put in questions as the lesson is going, and then having a Q&A session after that to go like, okay, so let's go through each question one by one. The learning can still be quite fluid and quite possible. So we have a ton of different interactive sessions that you can just pick and choose. It's almost like fitting together like a little puzzle to fit the event for the kind of interaction that you're looking for.
Right, like just the understanding that it needs to be beyond just a person on a screen talking to, the wide audience. There has to be more, right?
Yeah.
Or it's just, it's not reasonable, it doesn't feel the same, right? Yeah. Gerry, I'd like to ask you, before the pandemic started versus now, do you as an educator, as you are speaking to your students, do you find difficulty in connecting with them on the screen?
Not really, because I think in the past, we've actually video recorded all of our lectures, even though we have live sessions. And the rationale for video recording is for students who want to revise before the exams and so forth. But one method of teaching insofar as the classroom setup is concerned, I've been an adult educator for about 20 over years. And as opposed to lecturing to a group of students sitting in rows and rows of tables and chairs, I've always organized cluster seatings. And then within each cluster, we provide them flip chart papers in order to give their input. And this is where you get a lot of physical movement actually around the room. All of that is gone, right? And then in this week, I just conducted a lesson where we used brain dominance color cards. And one of my biggest challenges was with everybody handling the card, would I need to provide hand sanitizers for everybody? So I think we're obviously going into uncharted territories. A lot of the things are still very unknown, and we're sort of taking baby steps as we go along. So very definitely it's very challenging, but as far as the delivery is concerned, I think that part has not changed.
Right. It's the understanding that the pandemic, when you're trying to run events or teach classes or whatever it is, it's the small little things that are so difficult these days. Wendy, when you're in charge of your MCs, when you go down to the events or when you're running or planning the events, do you see a big difference between what you used to have to do versus now?
Definitely. So when I do a lot of show calling as well, so we actually have a table set up and gridded, and we put each of the speakers' names or host names, and we have plastic bags, Ziploc bags, tissue, wet wipes, the works, right? And we didn't realize how important that was to the speakers until the speakers came in and they went, oh wow, this is cool. Great, I can put my mask down and all that kind of stuff. And they appreciated the extra mile that we went. Even when we swap out microphones and all that, we would do a wet wipe, alcohol wipe over it, just to give people the ease of mind. I mean, some people say, just like, it look like play acting only. But I guess, in this day and age, you kind of don't know who's infected, right? So you want to make sure that you are kind of clean and healthy, not because of anything, but because you go home to a family. Right. Most people live with a family of sorts, even if you're single, you would hang out with friends and all that. You don't want to be the one to pass the virus to anyone. You don't want to be, patient zero or one of those things, So you want to be careful for yourself as well as also for your family. So when we do go down to do a shoot or anything like that, anything that we use, anything that our host would be using, microphone sanitized, we just make sure that we're extra clean and hygienic.
Right. And so, because there's now all these extra steps to be taking, right? Whether it's filming or an event itself. And so, Annie, I wanted to ask you, if clients or, educators decide to move their event or course to an online version, a virtual version, what do you see as the benefits of doing that?
Oh, there are tons actually. For one, there's so much more data available to you. Let's say if you look at a kind of like in-person conference that you used to run, people are just all over the place. They're making connections organically. You can kind of like look into the room and kind of have a sense that like, okay, things are going well. But when you do a virtual conference, you can count the number of touch points, the amount of time that people spend on the platform, how long they're watching a certain video, and based off of the engagement activities that you have online, like how many times they engage. So you can have a very clear picture of how your event is going. Like Pigeonhole Live also has this one where you can rate how well a question is being asked and answered,
right,
with like a smiley face or a frowny face. So that also gives you an idea of like, you can rate your panelists to see like how well are we doing. Yeah.
Right. So it's like a data thing. You can now actually get proper physical data from your sessions.
Yes, and the data is like so much more available out there depending on the type of event tech partners that you choose to engage with.
Right. And so Gerry, for yourself, whether, in your personal opinion or what you share with your students, what do you think are the benefits of moving online these days?
They're very similar to what you mentioned, the ability to capture more data and so forth. But whether that additional data translate into additional learning, that can only be determined when we do the final assessment. But I think the benefits of going online, obviously, if you have a particular lecture like this week, I'll be covering communication styles whereby they have to do a self-assessment. So a lot of things that we normally would do in class, they can do online. So when they come into class, then immediately we can jump into sort of the analysis and the discussions and so forth. The other benefit, of course, is with online learning, you actually increase the amount of self-directed learning on the part of the student. So again, these are new territories that we can maybe capitalize on to see whether we could let students handle part of their learning process and not have everything sort of directed by the instructor. So you move from the old sage on the stage to a guide by the side, part and parcel of what adult education is. So whether it's the formal educational setting in a university or you're running an executive training workshop, I think the whole process of learning is taking on very, very new paradigms that, as we mentioned earlier, we're taking baby steps, and I think the sharing is very important. So for us in education to share from the MICE industry professionals to see what are some of the cues and tips that we can take from them, and then we can interchange accordingly. So, it's very definitely a sharing among everybody, all the different stakeholders.
And speaking of sharing, Wendy, I have a very interesting question for you. So for all the MCs that you work with, now that it's shifted and a lot of things are maybe in front of a camera, whereas maybe previously, I know you mentioned that a lot of them have face-to-camera experience, but maybe previously they were used to working with crowds, your dinners and stuff like that. Do you see them preferring this new virtual, style where they have a chance to record and, maybe mess up and do that take again, or do they prefer the actual stage setup?
I don't think there's really a preference for everyone. It's a different feel. If you like doing dinner and dances, for example, you definitely need to have the live element, right? Then you suck the energy from the audience and then you give it out again as a host.
Right.
But I think for a lot of the events that we do now, it's very conference-based. I've had very few product launches, even if they're just like little commercials, whether it's a car launch or whatever, you just have one person who's hosting it with maybe the boss or whatever, you're talking about the car. And it's very TV commercial-like, it's maybe a 10-minute little slot kind of thing. So I think there really isn't that much of a difference, with the exception of D&Ds, for example, that you need the audience perspective.
Right. A lot of people watching us right now, joining us for the session today, they're in the industry either as students, budding, going into it in this strange time. So I'd like to go around the panel and ask everyone, based on your experience, the industry that you're in, what tips you can give them to adapt to this, new normal with a lot of virtual/online events. So let's start with Annie.
Well, coming from a event tech provider, like my advice would just be to look at your options. There are so many different types of event tech kind of like partners and tools that you can use. Like we've actually had a lot of partnerships ourselves with like video solution providers like Bright Cove, Cultura, Cisco WebEx, or even like event management and event marketing tools. A lot of them can do the work for you, the things that you assume will be very manual. So that takes a lot of the stress out of planning to do a virtual event by yourself.
Right. And Wendy, maybe your advice for either people who are trying to run events or people who are hosting events like MCs.
Oh, wow. Okay, I don't know whether I can say anything about running the events. I'm more of a show caller, but I think it takes a lot more effort right now. Actually, it takes more manpower, more man hours, a lot more laptops, a lot of cameramen to come into play. Actually, when I used to be from TCS. Oh, well, now it's MediaCorp, right? That's how old I am. But when I left, I thought, okay, I'll leave production behind. I do live events now. And 3 months ago, I got pulled back, into doing producing work for TV,
Yeah.
So I guess when a lot of people kind of thought that TV production as a cause is kind of play. I think now they're taking production people a bit more seriously, and they understand the grief that we go through to make a TV drama or a film. I've got event producers telling me that they've gone out to do a shoot and people are honking. The TV screen comes up with videos that have audio. Grab riders streaming by with whatever pop Thai music kind of thing. So I think they're getting to appreciate what production really is about, because that is what a lot of the events are going to be very much like productions.
Right, and this is something that you studied back in school as well. It's a skill that maybe you thought, I can leave it behind for a while, go into live events, and then suddenly you have no choice, right? You have to use these old school skills that you picked up on. So Gerry, as an educator, I'd like to ask you, in terms of people who are still going through their studies, maybe they are still very fresh in the hospitality industry. What sort of tips can you give them on how to adapt? Maybe they never studied these skills before. How can they adapt to this new world?
I think probably by attending a lot of webinars to see how other people are doing it, learning the ropes. For myself, who've been in education for quite a while, what I try to do is to take what has worked previously in face-to-face sessions and then try to convert it into an online format. So if you have sort of cluster, small group learnings, you have interactive exercises, I think all of those translate at the end of the day to your main objective. And the main objective is actually no longer teacher or instructor focused, but learner focused. So if you can go in and sort of build in, as we said, enough time to really tackle each and every learner, then I think, you're sort of halfway there. But one thing I realized also, besides the fact that we normally would deliver the lecture component and then we have a group discussion, is that because now if things are done online, I don't have a chance to actually interact with all 49 students in the class. And because of that, we've actually created WhatsApp groups. And now I get students, sort of messaging me right up to midnight and all that. So I find, you really have to, but I mean, that's part and parcel of the sort of the whole mission of teaching. And it has been challenging, juggling time and so forth. But I think if we have a chance, and we haven't had enough surveys to actually find how the students evaluate this new method of learning, I think we are not completely there yet, but we are making progress in the right direction. So it's still challenging, but very tiring.
Gerry, you might be tired of answering questions from your students, but unfortunately, right now we're going to move on to answering questions to our audience in the studio. So thank you very much, Gerry. Thank you very much, Wendy and Annie as well. And we'll see you back in the studio after this for our live Q&A with our panelists.